My stepdaughter announced at her birthday party whilst introducing guests that I was her mom's charity case. Everyone laughed, including my wife. What happened next shocked everyone. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Roy Steve from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I never planned on being a stepfather. It just sort of happened, like most things in my life, I suppose. I met Marlene at a friend's gallery opening in Midtown. She wore a yellow scarf that night, a soft kind of silk that framed her face just right, and I remember thinking how composed she seemed amidst all the noise and wine glasses clinking. She laughed at my dry joke about modern art, touched my arm like she meant it, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. It wasn't long before we started dating. 3 months later, I was practically living in her condo, and by the end of the year, we were married. That's when I met her daughter, Tasha, a sharp-tongued 17-year-old with a knack for making people feel small without raising her voice. From the start, I sensed I was more of a guest in their world than a new addition. We never talked about money in the beginning, but it quickly became apparent that I was the one expected to keep the ship afloat. Marlene had been between jobs when we met, and I didn't mind helping out. I was in IT consulting and doing well enough to cover the bills and more. At first, it felt like partnership, us against the world. I didn't realize then that I was simply being slotted into a role that had long been vacant. The provider, the fixer, the fool willing to bankroll their lifestyle in exchange for affection. I paid off Marlene's credit card debt within the first 6 months, covered Tasha's private school tuition when her father stopped sending checks, bought the groceries, paid the utilities, financed 2 family vacations, and even leased Marlene a new car when her old one broke down. Every expense was justified with a tight smile and a sweet thank you. But there was no real acknowledgement of sacrifice, just expectation. I tried to bond with Tasha. Really, I did. I drove her to school, showed up at her debate tournaments, even helped her study for the SATs. But she never warmed to me. She'd roll her eyes when I gave her advice, call me by my first name like I was a substitute teacher passing through her life. Once, when she didn't know I was within earshot, I heard her tell a friend, "He's not my dad. He's just some guy my mom married who pays for stuff." It stung more than I let on. I didn't bring it up to Marlene because what was the point? I didn't want to look insecure or petty. I convinced myself that over time, things would change. They didn't. The thing that gnawed at me most wasn't the money, though it was no small sum. It was the quiet way they both took me for granted. Like I had auditioned for a role in their play, and now my job was simply to hit my marks and say the lines they'd written for me. I remember coming home from a long business trip once, exhausted, jet-lagged, and craving a moment of connection. I walked into the living room to find them watching a show I didn't recognize, speaking in inside jokes I wasn't part of. They barely looked up. I stood there like an unwanted delivery man, bag still in my hand. "Oh hey, you're back," Marlene said, without even muting the TV. Tasha didn't say anything at all. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had become so peripheral in a life I was funding. I replayed every moment I had bent backward for them, every overlooked kindness, every swallowed insult, and began to wonder what would happen if I simply stopped. If I pulled away the safety net. But I wasn't ready to go there yet. I still believed in second chances. I still thought love meant patience. Looking back, I realize I was raised to think providing equaled love. My father worked 60 hours a week and rarely said, "I love you," but we always had food on the table and a roof over our heads. I took that model and ran with it, thinking if I just did enough, gave enough, I'd eventually be appreciated. But love, I learned, isn't something you can buy, especially not from people who've already decided you're a transaction. Still, I stayed. Maybe it was pride. Maybe I didn't want to admit I'd made a mistake. I kept showing up, paying bills, pretending I belonged. Until the night of the birthday party, when everything changed. The day of Tasha's birthday started the way most Saturdays did in our house, quiet, with a simmering undercurrent of tension no one acknowledged. I was up early, as usual, brewing coffee in the kitchen while Marlene fussed with the caterer on the phone. She hadn't even bothered to say good morning. The living room was half covered in glittery banners and pale pink balloons, colors Tasha had outgrown years ago but still insisted on. I'd covered the cost of everything, of course. The venue rental, the three-tiered cake, the live DJ, the flower arrangements, all billed to my account without so much as a thank you. I signed the checks like a ghost in my own house, invisible unless something went wrong. Even then, they only noticed me to point a finger. By mid-afternoon, guests had started to arrive, Tasha's friends from school, some of Marlene's relatives, neighbors I barely knew. I stood near the drinks table, nodding politely, sipping my whiskey too fast. I didn't recognize half the people who hugged my wife or waved at Tasha like they were lifelong friends. I felt like a prop, just the man who paid for the party. Nobody really talked to me. They looked through me, as if I was the hired help in a rented tuxedo. Then came the moment that would change everything. Tasha stood up in front of the crowd, her long hair curled and carefully arranged like it always was for Instagram. She clinked her glass, laughing in that overly loud way she did when she was trying to command attention. "Thank you all for coming," she chirped. "This is such a special day for me, and I'm so grateful to have so many amazing people in my life." I smiled, thinking maybe, just maybe, she'd say something kind about me. I don't know why I held on to that hope like a fool. I watched her scan the room, then fix her gaze in my direction with a sly grin. "And of course," she said, pausing for dramatic effect, "a special shout-out to my mom's charity case, Martin. Without him, none of this would have been possible. Literally. Thanks for footing the bill." Again. Laughter erupted. Loud, unfiltered, gut-punching laughter. Her friends cackled. Some of the adults chuckled awkwardly, unsure if they were supposed to find it funny. But what broke me wasn't her voice or even her smug smile. It was Marlene, my wife. She laughed. Not nervously. Not politely. She laughed like it was the best joke she'd ever heard, covering her mouth with one hand and leaning into her sister's shoulder. I felt heat crawl up my neck like a slow burn. I laughed too, because what else could I do in that moment? Storm out and make a scene? Show them all just how deeply it had cut? No. I stood there with a plastic smile, raised my glass like a good sport, and swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I spent the next hour playing host, shaking hands and making small talk, but inside, something had snapped. A quiet switch flipped. I knew right then that I was done. That night, long after the guests had left and the music had faded, I sat on the edge of our bed while Marlene brushed her teeth in the bathroom. My mind replayed the party on an endless loop. The laughter, the mockery, the sheer casual cruelty of it all. She came out in her robe, humming to herself, and flopped down beside me. "That went well, don't you think?" she said, scrolling through her phone, probably already uploading pictures to social media. I didn't answer right away. I watched her, this woman I had loved, and felt something cold settle in my chest. "Did you think what Tasha said was funny?" I asked quietly. She didn't look up. "Oh, come on, Martin. Don't be so sensitive. She was just joking." Everyone laughed. You know how teenagers are. I stared at her, at the woman who had shared my bed for years, and realized I didn't recognize her anymore. "You laughed too," I said. Now she looked up, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Yeah, well, what did you want me to do? Scold her in front of everyone?" "It was a joke, Martin. Let it go." I didn't say anything else. There was nothing more to say. The line had been crossed. And the worst part wasn't the insult. It was the fact that no one saw anything wrong with it. Not even my wife. Especially not her. I spent the rest of the night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind already shifting gears. I began planning my exit quietly, methodically. Not out of spite. Not even out of anger. But because I finally saw the truth, I was never going to be respected in that house. Not by Tasha. Not by Marlene. I had been a wallet with a heartbeat, tolerated only for what I could provide. The moment I stopped paying, I'd stop matching. And I couldn't live like that anymore. In the dark, I made a silent promise to myself. I would leave. Not in a blaze of fury, not with slammed doors or dramatic speeches. I would retreat with the same quiet dignity I had brought into that family. But this time, I wouldn't be coming back. I didn't make any drastic moves the next morning. That would have been too obvious, and obvious men rarely get clean exits. I went downstairs, made coffee like I always did, and read the news on my tablet while Marlene sat across from me scrolling through her phone. She showed me a picture from the party, one where I was barely in frame, and said, "Tasha got so many comments on this already." I nodded and smiled, but inside, my decision had already calcified. I would leave them. Not just the relationship, but the entire structure of dependence they'd quietly built around me. And I'd do it in a way that couldn't be undone. The first thing I did was meet with my financial advisor in secret. I told him I wanted to change all my account passwords and revoke any secondary access. "You mean your wife's access?" he asked gently, brows raised. I nodded. "Is everything all right, Martin?" I lied and said yes, just some precautionary measures. He didn't press. That night, while Marlene watched a show upstairs and Tasha was locked in her room on FaceTime, I sat in my home office quietly transferring funds. I opened new accounts in my name only, shifted assets, and closed out a few shared investments. It took me a week to completely untangle them from my finances. Every click felt like breathing a little easier. Next came the house. It was still under my name. Technically always had been, since I bought it after our wedding and never bothered to update the title. I contacted a real estate agent discreetly, told him I wanted to list it, but keep it off market for now. "You looking to upgrade or downsize?" he asked. "Neither," I replied. "I'm looking to start over." The next day, I began packing up my personal files, documents, and anything I didn't want to leave behind. I stashed them in boxes in my trunk during the day and drove them to a small storage unit I'd rented on the edge of town. At home, nothing seemed different. Marlene still asked me to Venmo her spending money. Tasha still demanded new shoes or tickets to some concert. And I kept saying yes, even as I planned their financial freefall. Every request they made reminded me why I was doing this. Not one conversation during those 2 weeks included an apology. No one brought up the party or what was said. They had moved on like it never happened, while I lived with the echo of that laughter lodged in my ribs like a splinter. I started going on longer business trips. In reality, I was scouting cities to relocate to. I flew out to 3 different places before settling on a small, quiet town 2 hours away where no one knew me. I signed a short-term lease on a furnished apartment and had the utilities turned on under a separate LLC I'd created. I even opened a P.O. box and rerouted my mail. I was methodical, calculated, and for once, I wasn't doing any of it for them. It felt foreign but exhilarating, making decisions that weren't tethered to anyone else's comfort. I'll admit, I had moments of hesitation. Guilt would creep in, like fog under a door. I'd watch Tasha come downstairs in her oversized hoodie, yawning like a little girl again, and for a second I'd remember the child I used to try to connect with. I'd watch Marlene cooking dinner, humming some old love song from our early days, and feel a pull in my chest. But then I'd remember the look on her face when she laughed at me. Not because it was funny, but because, deep down, she agreed with what was said. I wasn't her partner. I was her convenience. One night, I watched them through the living room doorway, Marlene and Tasha curled up on the couch, laughing at something on TV, and I realized how fully they had built a life without me in it. I was there physically, but I was a ghost. My presence funded their comfort, but it wasn't felt. Not truly. If I died tomorrow, they'd cry for a few days, post some filtered tribute on Instagram, and then turn their focus to what I left behind in my will. That realization cut deeper than any insult ever could. So I stopped leaving cash in the house. I stopped refilling the emergency grocery card Marlene used. I started letting little things fall through the cracks. A missed utility payment here, a lapsed streaming subscription there. I watched how quickly their gratitude turned to confusion and then to annoyance. "Why is the water bill past due?" Marlene asked one afternoon, waving the notice in her hand like a threat. "Must be a clerical error," I replied, not bothering to look up from my laptop. Tasha complained about the Wi-Fi being slow, and I shrugged. Maybe try unplugging the router. They still hadn't caught on. That was the part that fascinated me most. Even as the financial walls began to shift beneath them, they didn't think to question the foundation. They just assumed I would fix it, like always. That level of entitlement made me sick. And yet, it also gave me a strange kind of peace, because it confirmed what I needed to know. They had no idea how good they had it, and no clue how quickly it was all about to vanish. The last thing I did was call my lawyer. I told him I wanted to serve an eviction notice, official, legally binding. He paused. "Is this about your wife?" I said yes. "And her daughter?" "Yes again." He was quiet for a beat. You sure, Martin? I was. He sighed. Then I'll draw it up. But once we do this, it's done. Good, I said. I'm done too. I left before dawn the day the notice was served. No note, no warning, no dramatic exit. I slid my suitcase quietly through the front door, careful not to wake anyone, and didn't look back. The silence of the early morning gave the house a strange kind of holiness, as if I were sneaking out of a church I no longer believed in. My heart thudded steady in my chest, not with panic, but with something colder, something resolute. It was the kind of silence that comes only after you've cried all the tears, screamed all the screams, and decided there's nothing left to save. I walked out like a man leaving a prison that used to feel like a palace. By the time Marlene and Tasha woke up, I was already halfway to my new apartment. I had planned every detail, the route, the moving schedule, even the utilities I'd left paid for one more week to avoid an immediate collapse. I wanted them to feel the floor shifting slowly, to hear the echo before the crash. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. And I wanted space to finally breathe without having to apologize for the sound. The eviction letter was hand-delivered by my lawyer's courier later that morning. According to him, Marlene's first reaction was confusion. She thought it was a mistake. Then came the phone calls. First one, then two, then seven. I didn't answer. I watched my phone light up on the kitchen counter of my new place like a broken alarm clock. Each call was a bell tolling for the life I'd walked away from. Eventually, she stopped calling and switched to texting. What the hell is going on? One read. You can't be serious. Then, Martin, please call me. I didn't. That evening, she showed up at the building. I don't know how she found the address, probably from a piece of forwarded mail I hadn't rerouted in time. She buzzed the intercom 3 times, each longer than the last. I stood inside, frozen, heart pounding in my throat. Finally, I picked up. Martin, she said, her voice tight with disbelief. What are you doing? I told you. I'm done, I said. Done with what? She snapped. What is this? Some kind of punishment? I took a breath, slow and deliberate. It's not punishment, Marlene. It's self-respect. You just walked out. No explanation. No conversation. You think you can just serve us an eviction notice like we're tenants? Her voice cracked, not from sadness, but from outrage, the kind people feel when their entitlement is finally questioned. You were tenants, I said calmly. In my house. On my dime. And you treated me like a joke. That's not fair, she said, suddenly shifting gears. You know Tasha was joking. She didn't mean it like that. You're really going to throw everything away over one comment? I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just escaped me, hollow and exhausted. It wasn't just one comment, Marlene. It was years of being used, disrespected, treated like a walking ATM. That party just made it impossible to ignore. She went quiet on the other end. When she finally spoke again, her voice was low. So what? You're just leaving us with nothing? No, I said. I'm leaving you with exactly what you gave me. Silence. Disregard. And a lesson. She didn't speak after that. Just hung up. I stood at the window of my apartment and watched as she got back into her car, her body stiff and angry. She didn't look up. I didn't wave. That was the last time I saw her in person. Tasha didn't reach out at all. Not a text. Not a call. Nothing. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she was furious, blaming me for ruining her life because she had to switch schools and cancel some college visit. No apology. No accountability. Just the entitled rage of a young woman who had never been told no. And in a way, that made it easier. There was no sorrow, no lingering doubt. Just confirmation that I had made the right choice. My lawyer handled everything after that. The house was sold within a month, and they were officially evicted by the start of spring. I made sure the sale included no clause for temporary stay. No strings. No room for negotiation. They had to go, just like I had. Marlene tried one last time. Sent me a long email with paragraphs of memories, pictures of the good times, vague promises that things could be different. I read every word, then deleted it without replying. I wasn't being cruel. I was being final. In the weeks that followed, I settled into my new life with a kind of nervous stillness. The apartment was small but clean. The quiet was both comforting and unnerving. I no longer had anyone asking me for money. No errands to run for someone else. No cold dinners waiting while my family laughed without me in the next room. For the first time in years, I felt like the air belonged to me. But there were moments, especially at night, when the silence became a mirror. I would lie in bed and wonder how I had let it get that far. How I had become a man so desperate for connection that he'd funded his own humiliation. It's easy to see now, in the clarity of distance, but back then, love had felt like obligation. Like proving myself worthy over and over, hoping someone would finally notice I was bleeding. They never did, so I stopped bleeding for them. I stitched myself up, walked out, and started over. I may have left a house behind, but what I really left was a version of myself I no longer respected. And I have no regrets. The strangest part of starting over wasn't the solitude. It was how much I missed the noise. Not the people, not their presence, but the ambient sound of obligation. The clinking dishes after dinner, the low murmur of a sitcom playing in another room, the rhythmic creak of the stairs under hurried footsteps. I hadn't realized how deeply those sounds had etched themselves into my sense of normal. Now, in the small apartment where I had no one to cook for, no one to impress, and no one to fund, I found myself listening to silence like it was a language I was just learning to understand. I didn't tell anyone close to Marlene or Tasha where I had moved. But news travels. Within weeks, I started getting calls from mutual friends, mostly the well-meaning ones, the type who always think there's a middle ground to everything. What happened, man? They asked, as if I hadn't been living the answer for the past several years. I told them the truth, plainly. She laughed when her daughter called me a charity case in front of a room full of people, I said. I realized I was just a convenience to them. So I left. Some gasped. Some stayed quiet. A few tried to talk me into reconsidering. Maybe she didn't know how bad it felt, one said. You should at least talk it through. I shut that down quickly. I'd had all the conversations I needed. I had stayed too long already. The aftermath unfolded mostly through secondhand stories. One of Marlene's cousins, a woman named Renee who had always been friendly but distant, messaged me on LinkedIn. Just wanted to say I'm sorry for how things went down, she wrote. Some of us saw it but didn't feel it was our place to speak up. That message stuck with me longer than it should have. Not because it was kind, but because it reminded me how many people knew I was being used and said nothing. They watched me pour myself into a thankless role and stayed silent. That kind of complicity still stings. Tasha, predictably, went into full rebellion mode. According to an acquaintance from her school, she blamed me for everything. Having to transfer to public school, cancel her spring break trip, the general inconvenience of no longer having unlimited access to someone else's wallet. There was no reflection, no realization, just rage. She even posted a cryptic caption on social media one day, something like, "Some people pretend to be family until the money runs out." A friend sent it to me, expecting a reaction. I didn't reply. I never expected gratitude from Tasha, but I had foolishly hoped for growth. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd learn something from the collapse. Instead, she doubled down on the same entitlement that had poisoned our relationship in the first place. That part hurt more than I wanted to admit, because as much as I had detached, a part of me had still wanted to believe that walking away would somehow wake them up, that they'd miss me, that they'd see me. Marlene, to her credit, stopped trying after the email. No more calls, no more drive-bys. It was like once she realized I wouldn't be swayed by nostalgia or guilt, she moved on. I heard through a former neighbor that she was renting a townhouse near her sister's place and working part-time at a friend's boutique. She told people I had a midlife crisis, that I ran off without warning. I expected as much. People rewrite the story when the truth is too inconvenient. The weight of all those years didn't lift immediately. Even in my newfound freedom, there was mourning. Not for them, but for the version of me who believed he had finally built a family. I grieved the man who had sat at that dinner table year after year, hoping for connection, offering pieces of himself that were never valued. I remembered birthdays I'd planned, repairs I'd done on the house late at night after long workdays, groceries I picked up without being asked, because no one else ever did. All the small, invisible labors that no one noticed until I stopped doing them. That man had died the night of Tasha's party, and it took time to bury him properly. But eventually, the morning turned to clarity. My days became simpler. I got up early, Not because someone needed me to, but because I enjoyed the quiet of morning. I cooked for myself. I read more. I took walks without needing to rush home. I even started going to therapy, a choice I'd always dismissed when I was in the thick of it. My therapist, a calm woman named Carla, told me something in our second session that I've never forgotten. You don't have to feel guilty for leaving people who only loved what you did for them. I sat with that for weeks, let it stretch out in my chest, and rearrange the furniture in my mind. And then came the day I ran into someone who used to be a close friend of Marlene's, Daryl, a guy who worked in finance and always played both sides. We bumped into each other at a bookstore. He looked surprised to see me. "Heard you disappeared," he said, half smiling. "You doing okay?" I nodded. "Better than I've been in years." He laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, Marlene. She's still telling people you lost it. Left her with nothing." I didn't react. I just looked him in the eye and said, "I gave them everything." Then I stopped. That's not losing it. That's choosing peace. He didn't know how to respond. And that silence, that stunned, awkward silence, was the most honest conversation I'd had with anyone connected to them in a long time. There's something oddly soothing about folding laundry in your own space when no one is waiting for you to do it. In the quiet hum of my small apartment, on a breezy Sunday afternoon, I folded shirts that only I would wear, towels only I would use, and socks that no longer mysteriously disappeared. It felt mundane, even trivial, but after months of upheaval and years of emotional neglect, it felt like a ritual, like reclaiming something small that had once been swallowed by the noise of other people's needs. I didn't realize how much of myself I had surrendered until I started living without being constantly siphoned. People talk a lot about closure, like it's some dramatic moment. Tears in a parking lot, a handwritten letter, a long conversation where everything is finally said. But mine didn't come in one moment. It came slowly, in the details. It came when I stopped waking up dreading breakfast conversations that felt like performance reviews. It came when I realized no one was going to accuse me of ruining the vibe just for needing space. Closure came the day I threw out a drawer full of expired coupons Marlene used to hoard. The day I passed the grocery store where I used to shop for their endless lists and didn't feel a lump in my throat. And still, the past lingered. One afternoon, I sat down at my desk and began writing a letter, not for them, not to send, but for myself. A kind of unburdening. I poured everything into it, the years of unacknowledged sacrifice, the subtle humiliations, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who took but never gave. I wrote about the party, how their laughter had felt like a blade, how Marlene's smile in that moment had told me everything I needed to know. I wrote about the mornings I spent driving Tasha to school while she scrolled through her phone, never saying thank you. About the nights I came home from work and found dinner waiting for only two. I wrote and wrote until my hand cramped, and then I folded the letter and sealed it in an envelope I would never mail. I placed it in a drawer, alongside other private things, a photo of my parents, a lucky keychain I hadn't used in years, and the deed to the house I'd sold. Not because I needed to revisit it, but because I needed a place to put the weight of what I had carried. Somewhere safe, somewhere private. A grave marker for a version of myself that no longer needed to haunt me. Some days I still felt a tug, that old urge to check in, to know what they were doing, if they missed me, if they were okay. I never acted on it. Love, when it becomes currency, is harder to unlearn than we admit. And even after all the cruelty, a part of me still remembered the beginning, when Marlene wore that yellow scarf and smiled at me like I was worth something. It took everything I had not to let that version of her rewrite the ending. But I held firm, because I finally understood something most people never do. Walking away isn't the hard part. Staying gone is. One evening I returned to the neighborhood where my old house once stood. The new owners had painted it gray and added a porch swing. The garden I once meticulously maintained was now wild, overgrown with weeds. I stood on the sidewalk for a while, watching the wind move through the untamed leaves. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel regret. Just a strange kind of distance, like looking at a photograph of someone you used to know very well. A boy on a bike passed by and nodded. I nodded back. No one there recognized me anymore. And that was exactly how I wanted it. In the months that followed, I built a new rhythm. I joined a book club, started going on hikes, cooked meals that didn't involve 3 opinions and a dozen substitutions. I learned how to sit with myself, not out of loneliness, but out of choice. People started asking what had changed in me. "You seem lighter," one coworker said. And maybe I was. Because when you stop feeding people who only come to your table to take, you stop starving yourself in the process. Marlene sent one more message, months later, on my birthday. Just a simple, "Happy birthday. Hope you're doing okay." I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. Not because I was angry, but because I had nothing left to say. People think strength is holding on. But I know better now. Strength is letting go of people who refuse to see you, who love what you do more than who you are, who laugh at your expense and call it love. I didn't leave them because I stopped caring. I left because I started caring about myself more. And in the end, that's not selfish. That's survival. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful, real-life narratives about family, self-worth, and the courage to walk away. Share your thoughts or your own experiences in the comments. We read every one. Your voice matters here. See you soon in the next one.